the United States government gave millions of dollars to the United States military chemical and bacteriological warfare establishment at Fort Detrick, and they began experimenting with the AIDS virus. I knew about the AIDS 3 years before the word ever came out in the world, in the United States particularly, because of my field work in Sierra Leone. The British government used their Porton Down CAB facility. It's easier to get into the Bank of England boss than to get into Porton Down. All the deadliest viruses in the world are being crafted there, in pursuance of the goal, the Global 2000, to decimate the world. Shortly after this experiment had finished at Fort Detrick, the World Health Organization started a massive vaccination campaign. They said, for once and for all, we're going to wipe out the scourge of smallpox. They chose Africa and Brazil, launched a massive vaccination campaign. Immediately, AIDS began to appear. Thousands and thousands of people began dying of the strange new virus, which the World Health Organization then said had come from the bite of a green monkey. They forgot to tell you the green monkey's been there for centuries, and he'd been biting people if he ever did for centuries, but no disease of that nature had ever occurred. The World Health Organization deliberately took this virus, which was crafted from a series of animal viruses, including Mediavirus sheep, which destroys the brain, which is why you find AIDS patients get dementia probably first before any of the other AIDS-related complex diseases appear. And they began vaccinating innocent people on a massive scale, and they began dying like flies. Why Africa and why Brazil? Because those two countries had the biggest black population in the world. And I want to tell the black people of the United States of America, do not trust the Democrat Party. Do not trust government. Do not believe that government is your friend. To them you are dispensable.
That's what AIDS is all about. That's what all these little brush fire wars all over the world are all about. That's what's happening. That's why cancer cures are suppressed. It's because they fully intend to kill a minimum of 2 billion people. AIDS is an invention of man. It is not a natural disease, and it has been implemented and placed into the population as a population control. And when they did it, they had the cure before they did it. Mm-hmm. And when they deem that enough people have died or been killed, they will say, we have a cure for AIDS. And everybody will be called to report to some place to get an inoculation, which is going to do two things. One, it's going to stop AIDS in its tracks. And number two, it's going to implant a device which will be able to be used to track each individual person and maybe even to control those people. And that's what the pet implant program is all about. It's not about finding lost pets. They don't give a damn about pets, and they would never put a satellite in orbit to find a lost pet, but yet there's a satellite up there that they're using to find pets that have been implanted with these devices. They're testing this program on pets that's going to be used in human beings. And we're having problems with food supplies and timber and clean water and clean air now. And then after that, it doubles again in another 24 years. That's why they created AIDS. Because they didn't want to have to go around the world and say, you, and you up against the wall, you've got to die today, and shoot them. They did it in a manner to where they could target what they consider to be undesirable populations. And I want to be very clear that I don't agree with them on this. They specifically targeted blacks, Hispanics, and homosexuals for complete eradication. And AIDS is really going through those populations, and it's really doing a number on blacks, Hispanics, and homosexuals.
That theory has made news. I've heard that before, and
this
it's been
isn't
debunked very clear by the public, saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous." But you're saying that that may indeed be the case.
It's not ridiculous. I actually saw this in documents, and the project name was Project Naomi. MK Naomi was the name of it. It was a CIA project. The AIDS, whatever causes AIDS, whatever that turns out to be, according to those documents, was developed at Fort Detrick, Maryland, under a CIA project called MK Naomi. It was financed by $10 million for the Department of the Army's biological warfare programs. It was carried out, supervised by the CIA, carried out by scientists who work for the Special Operations Division of the Department of Defense, and it's doing its job.
And would you assume if AIDS doesn't work, there's a contingency plan for that even?
Well, I think that they have other things out there working concurrently. One thing I've learned about these men is they don't just do one thing. In case the public discovers what they're doing, or discovers that somebody's doing, whether they know who's really doing it or not, and stops it. What they have running is several concurrently running plans so that if one or two fail, the other ones are going to take care of the problem.
It sounds pretty hopeless. I mean, based on that scenario, is there anything, any uprising or what?
Yeah, there is, but it requires that people wake up.
HIV, the protein code is on the virus itself, and the recycle time of the gravity amplifiers is 10 milliseconds. Now, the HIV, have we talked about HIV?
No, but we can definitely go there.
AIDS was invented by a Navy surgeon named R.M. Donner, and when Bob read the read the briefing up at S4, one of the things that impressed him is that in the paper, all the briefings he read were, 50, 100 pages with a blue cover, and they were scattered on this table, and he could take each one. And what it was that as he progressed his clearance, these briefings would, let's say this is one briefing, it would be stapled here. And as his clearance progressed, they would unstaple a few more pages. But anyway, on the briefing of AIDS, and I have the, it's probably in here, because I wrote a whole thing on what he told us. It was developed, to get rid of a certain segment of, or number of human, but it was developed by R.M. Donner, and it has the exact cure for AIDS. And it has to do with the cucumber Trichosanthes Kirilowii, which was only grown in China. We tried to get it out of China, 3 attempts, but however they know, somebody knows, and each one had been cooked either by a microwave or something as it passed through customs, so it's impossible to get it out. But I'll read you the exact cure and how it works, and if you could...
Well, we have a contact right now who says he worked on that, on engineering the AIDS virus in Africa.
Possible, but it wasn't in Africa, it was here, and it was released in Africa, but it was developed up at S4.
A research scientist at the Plum Island Animal Disease Center from 1960 to 1983. We worked on a covert biological warfare program even after Nixon ended all offensive aspects of the bioweapons program. We engineered human embryos and tested their resistance towards the enhanced diseases we created. The security conditions at the laboratory were not the best, and there were numerous instances of disease spreading to nearby communities, and we were responsible for all the cover-ups. People have a right to know, and I have a responsibility to tell them what went on there. Dr. Traub's initial research at Plum Island focused on the tick and their ability to spread disease to the enemy. Our team continued his research through the 60s and 70s. In 1975, a town called Lyme, Connecticut began to experience several cases of an as-yet unknown infectious disease. The symptoms mimicked a variety of illness and a cause was difficult to ascertain. This disease is now known as Lyme disease, and it was the result of nearly research doctor from the World Health Organization was suspicious of the sudden appearance of a previously unknown disease and began to question our activities at Plum Island. This man's name was Dr. Herman von Buchholz, and his disappearance went unnoticed by the media. We could not risk having our biowarfare program exposed. Eventually, the warfare research facilities at Plum Island were shut down, and we were debriefed and dismissed with warnings to never discuss what went on there.
Him that some of the workers purposefully released ticks outdoors on the island in 1951, and that they all referred to one of the scientists involved as, quote, the Nazi scientist. But Carroll says he dug up a box of 1950s USDA files from the National Archives vault that included 3 folders, 2 labeled tick research and 1 labeled E-Traub. All 3 were empty. Even more damning, in an article in the Journal of Degenerative Diseases, Marjorie Tetchin reported that 60% of chronic Lyme patients are actually co-infected with several strains of mycoplasma, the most common one being Mycoplasma fermentans, which just so happens to be patented by the U.S. Army and Army pathologist Dr. Lowe. And then, as Tetchin points out, many are only treated for it for a month on antibiotics, and according to prestigious Yale University, which has only been implicated in government dirty work for decades with Plum Island right in its own backyard, if the person still has Lyme disease symptoms on the 31st day of antibiotic treatment, they're labeled as having something else, whatever affliction the disease has mimicked in their body. In this way, if they die of something else in the official medical record and in the statistics, not Lyme disease, and they no longer get counted in the Lyme disease statistics. And that's after the patient goes through the rigmarole to even be able to get tested in the first place. My mother went through this when she lived in Missouri and was bitten by a tick and later found the telltale bullseye rash. Her doctor straight up told her Lyme disease does not exist in Missouri, and it wasn't possible for a Missourian to get it, and that it was all in her head, and even went so far as writing in her medical chart that the patient is convinced she has Lyme disease, even though her doctor apprised her of the quote-unquote facts. She ended up having to go to a different doctor and plead her case to him and essentially argue her way into even being allowed to get the test to begin with. This right here is how statistics continue to be toyed with even to this day in order to cover up an epidemic that is linked to government biowarfare research. If you've ever been to Long Island, you see the signs everywhere in parks warning you about ticks and Lyme disease. That place is absolutely infested with them. Decades of animal disease research and burying the wastes of that research on Plum Island itself has left the entire place an environmental disaster. And according to Carroll, repeated attempts to decontaminate the crumbling, unsecure Lab 257 failed, and they finally had to build a whole new building on the island. But the thing is such a mess that USDA and DHS, who jointly run Plum Island, started asking about moving it in the last decade. And you'll never guess where they decided to move the Plum Island Animal Disease Research Facility to.
Very creepy stuff, and yet somehow they find a way to make it even creepier than Nazi-connected bio-research agents, because they're about to move Plum Island, or have already started, to move it to Manhattan, Kansas, in the middle of cattle and GMO crop country.
And Tornado Alley.
So what could possibly go wrong? Well, how about everything?
Manhattan, Kansas. Basically right smack dab in the middle of the country. That's right. As Congressman Michael Burgess pointed out at a September 2009 Oversight and Investigations hearing on federal oversight of high containment biolaboratories held before the Committee on Energy and Commerce, which was held a week after, by the way, the vote on the House resolution to move the Plum Island facility to Kansas, quote, the language of the resolution proudly touted that 45% of the fed cattle in the United States and 40% of the hogs produced in this country are in Kansas. Considering that hoof and mouth disease, which is the primary research being done at Plum Island, is a disease which can spread with devastating swiftness from humans to cattle and hogs, shouldn't we have done our O&I hearing on the scientific evaluations being done at DHS before we voted on a resolution saying that Kansas was the best pick? Gee, you think?
They want the major population centers wiped out so that the few that are left will be more easily controllable.